Why incorporate in the UK? So you're a foreign company, you're in Estonia, France, Nigeria, wherever, and you're thinking of raising investment and you're thinking of incorporating in the UK. In this video, I'll talk about the advantages of the UK, how to raise investment in the UK, and then also what to do to transfer shareholding. What if you've got safes or seedfasts in your business? What if you've got loans in the business? What if you've got government grants in your business? Transferring IP across, and a few other things. We'll have answers for some things. We won't have answers for others. But in the next few minutes, you should get a good idea of the steps involved in moving your company to the UK, at least to the corporate structure. So let's start with why incorporate in the UK. Well, the good news is the UK is insanely good. It's insanely business friendly. So you can incorporate your company on Companies House in the UK for £12, and it takes about 30 minutes. It's all English law. There are none of those hated notaries that the Germans and some European countries have. You can sign documents electronically online. Everything is set up to make it really, really easy to run your business. There are also great tax incentives. So for angel investors, they get SEIS and EIS tax breaks, which lead to a thriving UK ecosystem for investment. Investors can tax deduct 50% of their investment in your company from their income tax. For you as a founder, there is a business relief, which means that for the first £1,000,000 on a sale of the company, you pay only 10% capital gains tax. For your company, you can get back roughly a third of your expenses back from the government in R&D tax credits. For your employees, there's the EMI share option scheme. So they get really low taxes, only 10% capital gains tax if they keep their share options for more than 2 years and sell them later. And finally, employment law in the UK, I think, is about the right balance. Some European countries make it insanely difficult to close a company or fire somebody if they're not performing. The US may be a little bit too easy, and I think the UK has right balance. So overall, the UK is a great place to do business, create company, raise investment, and do all legals. And of course, there's SeedLegals here as well to make it much easier. So now that you're thinking, okay, I've got my company incorporated in country X, I would like to incorporate in the UK. What do I need to do next? Well, as I said, it's incredibly easy to incorporate in the UK. You just log on to Companies House, and for £12 in 30 minutes, you can create your UK company. You don't even need to be in the UK as a director. You can be anywhere in the world. What you will need is a UK physical address for correspondence from Companies House. If you don't have anyone in the UK, and you don't have an actual physical address, you could use a service like Rapid Formations, who will give you a physical address, often in Covent Garden, where correspondence is sent, and then they will digitize it and email it to you. One thing to note is if your directors are not in the UK, it might be much more difficult to open a UK bank account. Banks are really difficult when they do their KYC, the Know Your Customer checks. If you're not in the UK, it's harder for them to verify who you say you are, and you may find it more difficult. So you may just need to keep your original bank account, set up an account with Wise, and then you can create a pound account in about 5 minutes, and you're probably sorted for the near term. It might be a bit more difficult if you're raising millions where the investors send their money, but then go talk to HSBC Innovation Banking, previously known as SVB, who are used to these kind of multi-country companies. All right, so now let's talk about fundraising in the UK. So why fundraise in the UK? Well, the UK is across Europe the biggest investment by quite a long shot. There's a fantastic set of later stage VCs and private equity companies. If your company's later stage, which is probably not of interest to you right now, but is maybe one day. But for now, there's a thriving angel investor ecosystem that doesn't exist really anywhere else. Which means if you're looking to raise a few £100,000, you're going to reach out to angel investors. You can find them anywhere. They could be in your current country. They could be in the UK. And thanks to the UK's tax breaks, if they're a UK taxpayer, they can deduct the 50% of their investment in your company from their income tax. And of course, the other thing that makes it way easier to fundraise in the UK is SeedLegals. You just hop on the platform and all your funding round documents are right there and the team's there to help. So now, the other thing to note is that investors usually like to invest in their own backyard. So if you are in, let's say, Spain, there's a high chance that the investors you find are going to be based in Spain. They know the local language, they know the local law, they can find you, they can meet with you, and they understand the markets as well. And ditto, if you're looking to raise from UK investors, or indeed US investors, for the most part, they're going to be looking for companies to invest in that are not only registered in their country, but usually that the team is there as well, which sometimes is more or less important. But if you're a UK investor, you're almost certainly going to be looking for English law because you have no idea what Spanish law, Italian or Estonian law is. And so with rare exception, usually the diaspora. So if you have a Nigerian entity and you're looking to raise into your Nigerian entity, it's probably going to be Nigerians in the UK that you would be targeting rather than non-Nigerians. If you want to target a wider audience, you're really going to need to incorporate in the UK. And then investors will get their shares in a UK entity, they'll understand the English law, they'll get the legal documents and the shareholders agreement that they understand. And so, in short, in general, it's not a complete rule because about 20% of fundraising we see on SeedLegals is investors in other countries. But for the most part, you're going to raise investment from people in the country that either your business is or that you're incorporated in. All right, so now you've decided, great, I'd like to incorporate in the UK, but wait a second, I've already got an entity in, let's say for now, Estonia. So perhaps you've got, well, let's look at a few use cases. Scenario number one is a couple of founders have got shares in an entity, and we'll use Estonia for this example, and you'd now like to incorporate and move your top company to the UK. Well, if the only shareholders are founders, it's super easy. At the lowest level, you just make a new company in the UK and you just leave the existing company as is. If you haven't got really much intellectual property in it, or the founders can just move it across and just say that the intellectual property is in the new company, it's a no-brainer. You leave the other company, one day you'll sunset it, it doesn't really matter, but you've now got your new company with the founders now having shares in the new company. That is the easiest scenario. But let's say you've raised from some investors. And so let's say the founders have got 80% of the shares, and there are a few investors who collectively have 20% of the shares. Well, if you make a new top company, the investors will have no value at the end. So you want to typically give them the equivalent number of shares in the new company. So what you would do is you incorporate the new company on Companies House, and ideally at the time of incorporation, you would create a mirror of your cap table. So if you had two founders with 40% equity each and 5 investors with 4% equity each, you would set that up on Companies House with the same, usually ordinary shares, or maybe some have got preferred shares, and you would mirror that structure from incorporation. But it's also possible that the founders will incorporate with just themselves first and then add the others later, but probably you're going to create a mirror structure at incorporation. So that's not too difficult to do. You'll need the consent of your investors, of course. And we'll get to the gotchas in a few moments. So now, well, actually, let's get to the gotchas. What are the things that might make that more difficult? Well, one of the things is often in Europe, companies have received grant money from local government entities, and that grant money usually comes with some strings attached. It might be that your team remains in that country or that state or the area of the country. It might mean that your top company has to be there. So if you've received grant money or investment, you want to check carefully the rules around it to make sure that you can incorporate elsewhere and essentially move the TopCo over. And I know that in Italy, lots of companies get local government grants, and those government grants come with requirements. Some of them last for a few years, some might last forever. But, that is the first research to do. What you don't want to do, ideally, is just make a new company, leave the investors in your old company, which then withers and disappears while you do cool new things. That, of course, may not be legal according to your shareholders agreement, but really isn't a nice thing to do. And your goal is, of course, always to reward people who've taken that early risk in your company by giving them equivalent shares in the new company, even if you do move overseas. So you're going to check any consents that you need in order to incorporate your new top company. So what are the additional things to look out for? Well, what's going to happen is when you create your UK top company, it's going to buy all the shares of the existing company, probably at nominal value. So there should be, in theory, no taxes to pay. It's going to buy the shares of the existing shareholders for a penny each, for example, and give them the equivalent number of shares in the UK TopCo. And the UK top company will now own 100% of the shares in the subsidiary. And by the way, your team can still happily exist in the country you're in. No one's saying the team need to move, but you've got an English or a UK top company. You're raising investment in the top company. The top company owns 100% of the shares in the subsidiary, and the top company can happily move money between the top company and the subsidiary. So, for example, at SeedLegals, our TopCo, the top company, is in the UK. We also have a subsidiary in France. Why do we have a subsidiary in France? Well, we have a team of employees in France. So those are employed through the French subsidiary, which is 100% owned by our UK TopCo. And then we use Wise for our banking, and we have a euro account and a pound account, and you freely just move money across. And when we want to pay our French team, we just move money to the French account, pay the French team. If there are French payments made from our French customers, we can happily move them to our main account. And this complete fluidity, and thanks to services like Wise, you can maintain accounts in multiple currencies, and you've got very low exchange rates. So easy enough to hire people in the local entity, but investment is always in the TopCo. But what if your company has got intellectual property? So let's say you've raised, £200,000 of investment in your Estonian company, and you now create a UK TopCo. What happens to that intellectual property? The UK TopCo is going to own the shares in the Estonian company. Is the intellectual property going to sit with the Estonian company as a subsidiary, which is probably going to be fine for your UK investors because the UK company owns 100% of the local company? But should you in fact transfer the IP across? And if you transfer the IP across, it's moving across borders and there could be a tax issue. I'm not going to give any advice on that. It's probably going to be your local law that it applies to. So you may need to seek advice if you are looking to transfer substantial IP from your local entity to your TopCo. So the next thing then is one common use case these days, an increasingly common one, is it turns out the founders are the only shareholders in the local entity. You're going to make a UK TopCo, but you've raised investment in the form of SAFEs or advanced subscription agreements into your local entity. So maybe you have a Techstars investment or maybe an Accelerator investment. Shares have not yet been issued in the local entity, and you've got essentially a promise to issue shares. So how would you resolve that? And here I think you've got two ways to go. One of them is the SAFE or seedfast can be converted to issue shares in the local entity, and then you do the UK flip and the investor gets the equivalent shares in the UK company. The alternative is you agree with the investor that you're essentially going to rewrite or create a new version of their investment agreement that says instead of it being an agreement to get shares in your local company, it's now going to be an agreement to get shares in your UK business. And assuming they see extra value from the UK business and they don't have an issue with local requirements, hopefully your investors will be happy with that. And it may turn out that simply an exchange of emails is all that's needed to get their agreement, or it may turn out that you need some written document or a variant or a deed of variation. I don't know the answer. It's probably going to be in the local law, so you're going to have to check on that. And and if you do have investors in the local entity and shareholders, you're going to need to get their approval with a shareholder resolution and so on in order to allow you to essentially transfer their shares elsewhere. So the next thing to talk about is you've got this all sorted, and your next step is to go and raise investment here in the UK. Of course, you can raise investment from anywhere in the world. One of the joys on SeedLegals is it makes no difference where the investors are. It's the companies, if it's in the UK, it's English law, and it makes no difference if it's a US investor or a Nigerian investor or a UK investor. But for UK investors, they're probably going to want their SEIS or EIS tax breaks. And here, it's a bit more complicated because if you had just started a new company, you didn't have anything previous, and you created a new company on Companies House, and you went to raise investment, and you're making, let's say, a mobile app, it's going to qualify for these SEIS and EIS tax deductions with almost guaranteed it's going to. But if you have created a company elsewhere, raised money, built something, created intellectual property, and then transferred it over to a new company, HMRC, the government tax people who administer the SEIS tax scheme, may rule that this is what's called a continuation of trade. And they may say that why would taxpayer money be used to developing something new? Actually, it's using taxpayer money to encourage growth and innovation and risk taking when actually you've already done all of that. You're just moving it across. So there are two possibilities. One is that the HMRC will deem that you can't use funds, you can't raise SEIS in this company because it's continuing a trade and research and development already done. Or it might decide, actually, that's just fine, but SEIS is only available for 3 years from when your company started trading. And its bigger brother, EIS, is available for 7 years from when your company started trading. So what's possible is HMRC will say, okay, great, you can raise SEIS or EIS investment, but we're going to take the clock ticking from the start of trade, not from when you incorporated or began trading in the UK, but when you first started trading back in the original country. And HMRC are quite good at looking out for these things. So if you've started trading, it doesn't matter when you incorporated, it's your first commercial sale, which is your trade. If you started trading 4 years ago in, let's say, Estonia, it is possible that HMRC will deny SEIS, so you can raise investment, but you can't offer these tax benefits. It's possible if you've started trading 2 years ago, great, you can raise SEIS for another year before the clock runs out. So that's something that will really be based on the facts. And we've got an expert team at SeedLegals who's there to help with all of that. So, which then wraps up nicely, which is, I think that was hopefully a heads up on the things to do. If you've got questions, hit the web chat on seedlegals.com website, and the team are here to help you. We can help you with all the English law and the UK side of things. You'll still need to get local tax and local legal advice on the things in your country. Hopefully, once you experience the UK corporate system and Companies House, it's all very, very much easier than what you may well be used to. Enjoy. Thank you.